Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is really gratifying to see so many of you, despite the inclement weather. I'm Angelina Yi, the Executive Director of the Center for Pacific Rim, and today the Center is honored to present a very special program with a distinguished speaker, Professor Bright Sheng. Before we begin, I have a long list of names to thank. I would like to acknowledge the generous help and support from many friends and donors, and especially Dean Marcelo Camperi of the College of Arts and Sciences, here. Dean Mike Duffy of School of Business and Professional Studies, and Professor Stanley Kwok. Mr. Claudio Chicorelli, who although he cannot be here, is here with us in spirit. Center for Pacific Rim board members, Eva Monroe, Chris Whalen, Jim Rosenthal, Susan Law, and Mr. Terry Chua. Ms. Lucy Yuan and Dr. Ying Chang, Professor Peter Yu, and the Hong Kong University Alumni Association. I'd also like to recognize our co-sponsors, the Japan Policy Research Institute and Asian Society of Northern California, as well as the Department of Performing Arts. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Kristen Elvers and Mei Li for their infinite patience and attention to detail and their dedication to make this event possible. The purpose of this special program is to remember the devastation of war so that history does not repeat. And then through music, to commiserate, to console, and to heal. As we mourn those who suffered unspeakable atrocities in what is known as the Rape of Nanking, we're deeply dismayed by the present calamity by which the Japanese people are besieged. In a spirit of fellowship, love, and compassion, I would ask that we observe a minute of silence for these victims. Thank you. Our distinguished guest today, Bright Sheng Zongliang, Leonard Bernstein Distinguished University Professor of Music at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, is one of the most innovative and highly regarded music composers of our time. Born in 1955 in Shanghai, Sheng began studying the piano with his mother at age 4. During China's Cultural Revolution, he spent 7 years in Qinghai, a northwestern province of China, where he studied folk music of the region before his formal musical training in Shanghai and New York. Composer, pianist, and conductor, Sheng has performed with major orchestras and artists, and his work has been performed around the world. He has received numerous awards, including the MacArthur Genius Award, the American Award in Music from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and an ASCAP Achievement Award. In 1999, Professor Sheng received a special commission from President Clinton to create a new work, honoring the visiting Chinese premier, Zhu Rongji. In 2003, Carnegie Hall presented a Sheng portrait concert with the principals from the New York Philharmonic and the Shanghai Quartet. Sheng's works are well known for their dramatic style and historical signification. Two of his major orchestral works, Wen, which remembers the Cultural Revolution 1966 to 76, and Nanking, which you will hear tonight, as well as his opera Madame Mao, were inspired by events in Chinese history. His music has been recorded on Sony Classical, BIS, Delos, Coke International, New World, Kellogg, and Naxos labels. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wright Sheng.
Thank you very much, Angela, for this very generous introduction. I'm truly honored and delighted to deliver a lecture at this distinguished university. Although this university, I noticed, has a very small music program. But I believe music, as a living art form, survives and thrives on understanding of the tradition and on innovation. And at the very core of this process of creative thinking, this leap of imagination, this balance of what has been done and how far we can advance it, is exactly what we need for every profession. In that respect, I'm convinced that we can all learn from each other. Today, my lecture's subject is about the war and peace, for which I would like to talk about the recent symphonic work of mine, Nanking, a threnody for Pipa and orchestra. A work I wrote to commemorate the arrival of the new millennium in 2000. As a creator of the work, I would like to briefly walk through with you the process of writing, how the piece came about. Nanking is one of the few compositions of mine that belong to the so-called programmatic music, meaning a composer is trying to tell a story with music. But can music really tell a story? I would like to pose that question now and discuss this later after we hear the piece. In 1998, actually, I received a phone call from a friend of mine, a conductor friend of mine, Christoph Eschenbach, who was a frequent guest conductor of the San Francisco Symphony here. You probably know his name, but at the time he was the music director of NDR, it's Northern German Radio Symphony. And he said to celebrate the new arrival, the arrival of the new millennium, and he would like to commission 7 composers of around the world to have a concert to be performed, presented on the New Year's Day, January the 1st. Horizons. And I thought maybe the best way to celebrate the arrival of the new century is to remember the man-made tragedies of the past century and their impact on humanities. But before I start to talk about the work, I would like to add that by no means this composition is to condemn a nation and its people. The majority of my works are non-programmatic and not political. But I have written a few, including the one that Angelina mentioned. It's called Hen, that's Shanghen, Shanghen de Hen. In translation could mean lacerations in memoriam 1966 to 1976, which is a reflection on what was like growing up as a small child during the Cultural the infamous Chinese Cultural Revolution, and this work. Those are sort of the only two large orchestral works that are political or programmatic. And this is because I believe that sometimes art can deliver a far more effective message than propaganda and words. And the message I tried to convey in this work is that war is brutal and tragic, and in the end, everyone who has lived through this process called war is a victim, whether as a winner or a loser. Here I would like to mention this book because in 1997 this book came out, which was as a 60th anniversary of the event of Nanking, the rape of Nanking. And I read the book, I was totally touched by this book. And so when I was thinking about choosing a subject matter for this concert, Seven Horizons, I thought maybe I could talk about what I feel like a composer, what I can say as a reaction of reading the book. So here I would like to read a little paragraph by Iris from the introduction of the book. The chronicle of humankind's cruelty to fellow humans is a long and gory tale. But if it is true that even in such horror tales there are degrees of ruthlessness, then few atrocities in the world history compare in intensity and scale to the rape of Nanking during World War II. And I believe most of you probably know what is the rape of Nanking about, but I'll just sort of mention briefly. In December 1937, in what was then the capital of China, one of the most tragic events in the long annals of wartime barbarity occurred. The Japanese army swept into the ancient city of Nanking. It's called Nanjing now. Within weeks, not only looted and burned the defenseless city, but systematically raped, tortured, and murdered thousands of Chinese civilians. Sadly, the story of this atrocity continues to be largely unknown from public consciousness in the Western Hemisphere. My work is written in memory of the victims, not a recreation of the barbarity. I have heard horror stories about the massacre when I was a small child. Like my grandmother used to tell me that during that time, she was living in Shanghai. Even every day on the Huangpu River of Shanghai, which is at the lower end of the Yangtze River, one would see bodies flowing down from Nanjing. And how the water of the Yangtze River was near Nanjing was red for months because the amount of human blood deposited there. However, since I was not old enough to live through these horrifying episodes, the story can only exist in the realm of my imagination. So in this composition, what I try to tell is a story from the world of one person who is a victim, witness, and survivor. I thought maybe I could use a Chinese instrument called a Pipa to represent this person. Because Pipa, as you know, is a very fragile, soft, and intimate instrument. And using the Pipa against the vast sound of a Western symphony orchestra. But for those of you who know the story of Nanking massacre or have read Iris' book, the story is not only about brutality, fear, and anger. It is also, in a way, a celebration of human spirits, a celebration of the people of Nanking who had endured and survived this cruel violence when the government of China at the time was incapable of defending its own citizens, a celebration of how people thought of inventive ways to outwit, even fought, the enemy soldiers with bare hands and lived to tell their tales. And there were also heroes during this sad time of history. Here I would like to read another paragraph from Ira's book, which tells very poignantly of the circumstance of these heroes and what happened.